What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Jay Melone, and we speak about the shy facilitator and whether we're supposed to be experts. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, why don't you visit workshops.work and download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy the show. Jay, welcome to the show.
Hi there.
I am very excited to have you on the show, since I think the first time I came across your profile was at the beginning of Corona, when you released this mini course, something you called a mini course, and then it was this never-ending course. And I was like, he's giving away so many gems. I want to get to know this guy. So here we are.
Yeah, I'm sorry that Corona brought us together, but in other ways, I'm grateful.
Yeah, sometimes there are good things and bad things, right?
Yeah.
And before we dive into the topic and find out more, I always like to start with a question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
You know, I suppose when I realized that running a design sprint required more than me just showing up and going through the recipe and realizing that there were people in the room that I had to take care of. So I suppose at some point I picked my head up and was confident enough that I could run a process, and now it was time to really take care of the people and the energy and the time and all sorts of other things. And I've met great facilitators along the way, and they called themselves facilitators. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Maybe that's a good title for what I do."
Maybe I want to be part of that club.
They seem like really cool, smart people. Maybe I can be one of them when I grow up.
So for you, what makes a good facilitator then?
Luckily, I just had a great conversation about this topic with a friend of mine, and where we centered in on the most, if we had to pick one habit or one skill set, is being curious. But the funny thing about that is I've never considered myself curious. I've always considered myself a bit selfish and more of an engineer that likes to just put his blinders on and run in a direction without stopping to talk with people. But here I am talking with you, and we only met a few weeks ago. So, and I'm here because I'm curious about what you're building and what you're doing. So curiosity in the room and knowing who's in the room with you and what they're hoping to get out of the conversation that you're there to help them have requires a lot of patience, a lot of what my friend referred to as having a journalistic mindset. So being able to just show up and leaving all of your concerns about being right and being the expert and feeling threatened, being able to put that aside because you're there in service, which is hard to do. Working with people in a service mindset just to serve them and get what's best for them, even when they get upset with you, takes a lot of courage and patience. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear two things. So the curiosity, I think, is very important, as you say, to just not to put yourself first and to leave everything open to whatever there is to emerge and what the group needs. And this journalist mindset who puts together all these evidence. So the journalist, right? You collect all the evidence, you need to listen, you need to remain objective, and then write a story out of it.
Yeah. And that was the mini course that you found. I didn't have those 30 lessons created and said, okay, I have 30 things and now I'll share them with everyone in this specific order. I had one or two things that I was like aware of that I had learned recently. that I said, I'll write a LinkedIn post and share this one thing. And then I said, well, there's this other thing here too. And then a conversation later, and someone said, but this is really interesting. This here too. Can you talk about that as well? And so my ability to remain curious allowed me to take something that I knew a little bit about and turn it into something that I could share with other people. But along the way, I learned about what I had been learning.
What do you mean?
So there was no facilitation course that had been like perfectly designed and ready to go. It was just an idea. And as I opened up the next week's lesson and realized maybe I should see what other people are really interested in hearing about in terms of facilitation. And so I would talk with people. How is remote for you? Or what's it like for you dealing with people that come into the room with all of the ideas and all of the plans laid out? Because I didn't have the answers to all of those lessons before. And a lot of it came through conversation or watching other people. And I just shared what I observed and what I had captured as a journalist, as a facilitator that was on the same journey that everybody else has been on, of learning and sharing what I've been learning.
And I wonder to what extent actually a facilitator is a mix between a journalist and an engineer. To put things together to make them work. Because an engineer crafts right? Designs machines or makes processes that they work.
Yeah. That's a great observation. So at some point, you have to stop observing and create something from that. You have to maybe connect the dots or put two people together or design an activity or a conversation for them to have once you've done a little bit of observation. I think what I've learned the most is the difference between an expert and a facilitator is that the facilitator will take the time up front to learn who's going to be in the room with me, what's important to them, where are they headed, what are the dynamics going to be like when this person and that person are sitting next to each other, or in today's day and age on the same Zoom call, and really preparing and understanding what you're walking into, and then using all of your engineering and designing capabilities that you have in your back pocket to design that conversation and that experience for them. Maybe that's the connection.
Yeah. Through the facilitator doing the homework and learning about the people and what matters to them, whereas the expert or the trainer learns about the content to bridge the knowing gap.
Yeah, and it's a lot, it's a lot of pressure to be a consultant and to be an expert. That's why I think maybe to answer your first question, I probably didn't call myself a facilitator for a while because I didn't like the pressure that came with it of knowing that 10 people had invited me into their circle to lead their conversation. Because I was like, who am I to be at the center of this conversation, right? And that's something that I've learned, is that the facilitator, maybe he shouldn't or she shouldn't be at the center or at the front, but drifting around the edges.
Totally, because I think that's a beauty of being a facilitator, that you're not supposed to come in with all the answers, but helping others to find the answers. So you come in with the proposition that those who are in the room, they already know, and it's just your task to get it out.
Yeah, which is why it's really funny that, I'm not sure if funny is the right word, but which is why it's always so interesting to answer the question, do you have expertise in this domain, in this industry? And I say, of course not. Not like you, but that's not what my job is. My job is to help you identify and connect the dots between what you already know. It's like coaching. Coaches don't tell you this is what you should do. They ask you, what do you want to do about it? And allow you to have that conversation with yourself and ask you the right questions and then hold you accountable. So, facilitator does a lot of coaching as well. A little bit of therapy, a little bit of performance.
Totally. And still in our exploration call, we spoke a lot about this notion of facilitating from the front versus the back, being at the center of a conversation whereas being on the side of the conversation. What is your experience with that? Where would you place yourself?
Well, right. So a lot of that depends on the context. If you put me at a dinner party, or in the days where people used to be in spaces, physical spaces together, and we would go to conferences, I would be on the edges or hiding behind a plant or in the kitchen cleaning dishes because it was safer to do that. Ironically, I'll have barbecues and parties at my house, and I'm off to the side, cooking or doing something, rarely ever in the center of the room, because I'm more happy and more pleased with letting other people have those conversations amongst themselves. So putting people together to talk and then disappearing quickly, right? So that's the context of I hadn't been invited to be at the center. I hadn't been invited, other than to be the host, to be the facilitator. But when I'm asked to facilitate, it's very different. It's totally different. I feel, our friend Daniel talks about feeling anointed. So I feel like I've been bestowed the privilege, but also the expectation that I should make sure that the conversations are happening. But that doesn't always mean that you need to be between two people. You could put them together and then sort of drift off to the side and then check in with them. Or you could get everybody's attention because everybody's lost in thought or having sidebar conversations that aren't germane to the topic, and you can get them back together and refocus them, whether it's something that you drew out from conversations that you heard or something that you captured visually to say, here's where I think we are. Mm-hmm. Do we agree that we want to be over here by the end of this hour, by the end of the workshop? And then drifting back again, and letting them continue, refocus, and then drift away.
Yeah. And it's so funny. So I can totally relate to that. When I'm at a conference or at a party, I am one of the shyest people ever. And you would find me either in the kitchen cleaning the dishes or offering people some snacks or refilling glasses just to find a role, because I wouldn't know what to do. And funny enough, while you were explaining how you experience it, at one point I thought, maybe that's just filling this role of a facilitator, right? That, okay, we do need a role, or we find a role for ourselves to make it easy for the others to connect, so that we actually don't have to stand in the middle or to be the center of attention.
Yeah, that's interesting. And even sometimes using visuals. For the longest time, I imagined that anytime I was leading any conversation, I should have a presentation behind me.
Why would that be?
Because everybody needs to look at visuals while you're talking. God forbid they're looking at you. And then little by little, going from, I would walk into a design sprint, right? And at a point, my official new haircut design sprint presentation deck that I brought with me was 212 slides. And I felt very proud of that. But it's so simple. You look at people's faces when the slide is behind you and they're not looking at you. They're either looking at their phones or they're looking at the slide, but they're rarely looking at you, maybe glancing at you. So they're not engaged really. And I'm not sure that you're modeling the behavior that you expect of them, right? So when you put them into a group to speak, if they're looking elsewhere rather than looking at each other, there's a loss of connection there, right? And engagement is sort of like the principal factor of whether you get something out of the conversation. People are engaged. And if you model to them that engagement looks like looking elsewhere other than where the conversation is happening, then you're probably not setting the right tone.
I love that.
So it's been an experiment to do away with all of the slides and all of the materials. You also anchor people in what things look like when you have your perfectly designed presentations and visuals in the background.
And I always have the impression that the slides are more for the presenter to have an anchor and to remember what to say.
Yeah.
And then,
which also adds more pressure to you because now you have to follow the script that you designed 6 months ago.
That's true. And I wonder whether the fact that now all the workshops and meetings have moved online actually forced us to be more mindful about that. Because I think that even fewer facilitators, trainers, consultants, whoever would now use a slideshow because they know that they will just kill the entire energy of the group.
Yeah.
After the slide has been there for too long.
Yes. We live in a world of lots of murals and Miros and freehands, all these places to come together and collaborate. And taking people out of that space and bringing them into your keynote or your PowerPoint, sometimes it feels jarring. Sometimes people would rather just stay in one place and have the conversation. So even taking a baby step of pulling your slides into those tools and just speaking to them there. A step further that I like to go to is creating video of things that I can demonstrate to them beforehand that they can look at on their own and come prepared, especially in remote and online, because our sessions are shorter, right? So what can I do for them beforehand? What can I give to them beforehand to look at a presentation, listen to me narrate it and talk through it, and then come to the table prepared to have the conversation rather than come to the conversation only to sit quietly and listen to me talk.
Yeah, I think we became so much more aware of our opportunity costs of a meeting. Mm-hmm. Because before, when we would spend 8 hours, in the best case, in the office, whether we spend it in our own office or in a meeting actually didn't really matter because it's either one or the other. It's still work. But when we work from home, maybe we have the opportunity to actually spend half an hour with our family or with something else that we enjoy doing in our own house. So the opportunity costs of spending this half hour in a meeting, looking at slides, is totally too high or unreasonably high.
Yeah.
It's nice to have videos or something that people can prepare beforehand so that you can be more mindful of their time once they spend it together.
Yeah, another interesting thing that I've noticed is that people are more willing to prepare and look at things before the workshop. I used air quotes there. In this virtual world, I think they're more willing to do that because, well, in another world where I'm asking them to get on a plane and unpack their bags in a hotel and spend the night away from their family and then come, take a metro or subway or a taxi to the workshop space and be in an unfamiliar foreign space and be with strangers, that's already a lot to ask people. And so in that world, me asking them to prepare and look at things and study and look at the research beforehand, they're much less ready to do that. They're like, I'm already giving you my free time. I'm away from my work. I can't get all these things done that I have on my plate. Hell, if I'm going to spend any time doing anything to prepare other than to walk into the workshop. But in this world where we're remote and we're online and you're letting people do things more asynchronously and at their own schedule, they're more willing. They'll look at something, they'll watch a video, they'll get prepared, and you do it in bite-sized chunks so that they're more willing to do it.
Interesting observation. And I wonder whether it has also to do with the fact that in an online meeting, an online workshop, you're closer to what's happening, so it's more difficult to pretend that you're not engaged because you don't know whether the facilitator will put you in a breakout room, just the two of you, and then there you are. You need to get engaged and do something. Yeah,
there's lots of tricks. I joined an 1,800 person workshop once with Seth Godin, the author, marketer, entrepreneur, and we broke out into I don't know, whatever 1,800 divided by 4 is, and he was in my breakout room. So I sat up in my chair and I engaged, And I was like, look at this. I get to hang out with Seth and talk about this topic of this prompt that he put in front of us. Yeah. Surprise.
Oh, what did you learn about being a participant in an 1,800 people workshop?
So I had this made up metric in my head that the most people you can have for an effective conversation on a Zoom call or a video call is 20, I think. And then I did that session with him, and most of the time I was in a conversation with pods of 4 people having like very intimate conversations. And then we would come back together and do these fish bowls and large group share outs. And I was like, wow, it doesn't have to be one or the other, of course. You can have 20,000 people, maybe that's pushing it. You can have a whole bunch of people on a call, but still make it intimate. You could still design intimacy into a call with 100 people, 1,000 people. It's all up to you how you design people's time of spending it together.
And I think it's actually easier to design these intimate moments in an online meeting than in a real space where you have the noise, where you have FOMO, where you have all these dynamics going on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And to come back to the topic of facilitating from the back and the front, being a shy person in real life, turning into a confident presenter, facilitator, as soon as you're handed the marker. Do you think it's easier or more difficult for a introvert or shy facilitator to guide groups online versus on-site?
Well, there's 2 parts to that, actually. So what I've learned over the last couple of years is the difference between shyness and introversion. I learned this because people would routinely come up to me or reach out to me because I would mention something about being introverted. And they'd say, why do you always say that you're introverted? You do these videos and you're in front of rooms of people, your face is all over the place. And I'm like, it's not what I prefer. I prefer to be at my desk with the lights dimmed and sitting and just doing work. The days were easier as an engineer where I was allowed to just like put my headphones on and write code and sit in my desk. People knew to just leave the engineers alone. So it's not in my nature to do all that stuff. And they'd say, yeah, I'm introverted too. And what I started to try to figure out is, when did I become introverted? And what does introversion mean? And I read a book that changed my life. It changed my whole perspective on who I am. It was by Dr. Ellen Hendrickson, called How to Be Yourself, which the title kind of made me feel sad for a minute. Then I started reading it, and almost right away, I had this total revelation about who I was, because she made these distinctions between being introverted versus social anxiety, or sort of like the fear of performing in front of a group, or shyness. You know, I think those 3 are much more closely related than introversion. A lot of shy people tend to be introverted, but they're not, they're different, right? And so introversion is more something that you're born with. It's something where you'll go to the party, but then you need quiet afterward, or you'll just decide not to go to the party altogether because you'd much rather have a dinner, a one-on-one dinner with a close friend. Shyness is learned from some traumatic something that happened to you, most likely as a child, where you learned that it was better to keep your head down and not speak up. So for me, understanding and using those sort of like the party theme, right? Because I love going to parties. I love hosting parties. I'm okay if someone invites me to do a speech or lead a workshop, as long as they allow me to design something that I'll feel proud of and something that I can do. I'm all for it. And I don't need to retreat to a dark cave afterward. So I've actually learned that I'm quite extroverted, but I'm shy, which I'm a little bit of a rare case. I forget what the percentage is. Something in me says it's like 7% of extroverts are shy or have social anxiety. So I'm a little bit of an anomaly. But just that realization was really, really helpful to know why I do what I do and how I show up and what happens for me in front of a group of people. So the first part is just getting clear on what is your personality type. Are you introverted or are you just shy? And what to do with those. Because introverts can be just as powerful a facilitator as an extrovert. In fact, introverts have all these superpowers where you can listen. You can really pull out the thread of what someone's saying, and you're just very attentive to what they're talking about and the energy in the room. Whereas an extrovert might be creating that energy and really making sure that people feel excited and safe and the conversations are flowing, right? So that was a big light bulb moment for me. And to answer your question, can introverts then function better in an online format? I think shy people can do a better job online. And I'm not sure why. There's something like, I see your face right now, this podcast, and we're just going to do voice, but there's something about my face being on and in front of you that puts a little bit of anxiety, right? There's a little bit of anxiousness. But if we were together, I'd be more anxious. So I don't know what the science is behind doing this. I'm still seeing your face, but I'm not in the same physical space as you. So it does make it easier for me. And my mom and dad taught me to look people in the eye. But there's something about looking at your face here versus looking at the little camera up there where I'm able to create some kind of disconnect for myself that takes the pressure off of me versus being in front of a group of people and looking them in the eye and knowing that they're looking at me. So it is a bit easier for shy folks, for socially anxious folks to facilitate and lead conversations through Zoom calls and video calls. I do feel like it is easier. Yeah.
Which is actually interesting. I haven't even thought of that, because in order to look someone in the eye in the Zoom call, you really need to stare into the camera. So basically you're not looking at their face.
Yeah.
So it might be easier for someone who actually fears the eye contact to make eye contact in a video conversation.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of that.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. I know that 30 people on a Zoom call are looking at my video, but there's something different about them looking at my video versus looking at me in that space, standing there, something different.
Hi, this is Andrew. I'm a facilitator and head of customer success at Session Lab, the dynamic workshop planner tool. More than 30,000 facilitators, trainers, and coaches use our workshop planner tool and save time and effort in the design process. So, how do they do it? Our drag and drop agenda builder makes it easy to transform your ideas into high-quality workshops, and the timing of your agenda automatically updates when you make changes. You can collaborate in real time with your colleagues and easily share professional-looking printouts with your clients. And if you need inspiration, you can check out our library of more than 500 activities and exercises and simply drag the ones you need right into your workshop agenda. So check out Session Lab to save time and effort in your workshop design process. And now get your first 2 months of Session Lab Pro absolutely free at sessionlab.com/workshopswork.
Would you advise other facilitators or maybe aspiring facilitators who think, oh, I'm shy, I'm a shy person, I will never be a good facilitator? What would you advise them?
Of course, the answer is to do it, right? If you want to do anything, you just have to do it. And another principle that I learned from this book that I mentioned, or not learned, but remembered, because we learned this as kids, is that first comes the act of doing something, then comes confidence in doing it. Most people, I shouldn't say most people. When we're most fearful, we think, well, when this thing happens, I'll feel good about it enough to go out and do it and tell people that I do it and do it in front of other people. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You have to go out and do it in front of one person that you trust. And, the other thing that the book talks a lot about, these physical things, these stories that we tell ourselves, right? So that you tell yourself, everyone must hear my heart beating through my chest right now, or my face must look like a cherry, it's so red, or everyone sees me sweating in front of the room. And the reality is that most people glance at you for a second and say, she looks nervous, but anyway, I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch.
Yeah.
Right. We tell ourselves this story that, it's very selfish if you think about it. Maybe shy people are actually the most selfish people on the planet, because we tell ourselves that everyone cares about us so much that we need to be put together and buttoned up every second of the day, which is just not what's going on in the world. People are living their own lives and paying attention to what's important to them.
Yeah, and I guess when we think how much time we spend thinking about others, and just for a second assume that for the others it's the same, we actually realize how little people care about the small details we do, and we do wrong.
Right. And everyone's rooting for you. Nobody wants you to look foolish. No one, because that makes them feel uncomfortable. So everyone wants you to perform and do well. And if you go into it thinking that these people are here to learn from me and to feel inspired and to get through the conversation and get to whatever the business outcomes were, then they're looking to you to do a great job, and they're cheering for you, And I think a lot of us go into the role of facilitation thinking this activity is going to suck, and this person is going to hate me for making them get a little uncomfortable. But as long as you make them feel safe and make them feel heard, make them understand that you're here to support them and you're here in service of them, they'll trust you and they'll do it and they'll stop looking so upset.
Yeah, and I think as long as we have confidence in what we're doing, maybe not necessarily in ourselves, but at least in the process that we are offering, and if we dare to also go out of our comfort zones. That's something that I really learned recently, and especially through the process of Never Done Before, this festival with this daring title. I realized just putting the label out there and telling people, okay, I'm doing this for the first time, facilitating on a platform that I never used before, and suddenly there are 15 people there expecting me to host a workshop. We talked about performance anxiety before. And that was exactly it. I was supposed to have a co-facilitator who knows the platform, didn't work out, was there, nothing worked. But then as you said, the group is usually so forgiving and kind. And just by admitting that you don't know, that I didn't know as a facilitator and as a host, and then suddenly I just asked them to participate. I shared my screen and said, okay, if you find this button that I need to press now in order to send you in the breakout rooms in this new platform, tell me. So it kind of then became this shared learning moment where we shared the facilitation burden, which was a great learning moment and created so much connection.
Yeah. And there's always going to be one person or a couple people that are disappointed in you. But, I think a lot of that is just a reflection of their internal world. I think their greatest fear, maybe they want to be doing what you're doing, and their greatest fear is to take that leap and to lead a conversation like that. But they hold themselves back because it would need to be perfect. Of course, they could never not know what they were doing, and they could never admit this is new. And so you doing that is, very scary for them. And so they might react and say, they might react and feel like you're wasting their time. I feel like a lot of people, their greatest frustration that people might feel in a workshop is that you've wasted their time somehow. Yeah. So how do you instead make people feel when you're uncertain or when things are going sideways, that you still have their best interest at heart and you're here to help them. But right now in this moment, things blew up on you and you need to recover and you need their patience and their grace for a second.
Yeah. And then to keep calm, inhale, exhale, remain curious and on this learning journey. I think that's the most important. So funny enough, I always thought, okay, this would have been a failed workshop, a waste of time, but actually it turned out to be a great learning moment. So according to you, what makes a workshop fail?
We talked a little bit before about arriving prepared. I think if your job is not to be the expert, right, there's pressure that we put on ourselves. You were hired to finish the sprint. You were hired to get to this business outcome, right? And there's metrics associated to you being hired or you being put in the position. If you work at the company, you raised your hand to say, I'll lead this. Okay, if you're going to lead this, this is what I expect at the end of this session. So we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to get to that point. So if you're unprepared to empower people to have that conversation, then it's a failure on your part. Like if you didn't design the experience and the activities and the conversations so that they can be ready to decide and to get to that outcome, then you failed. But if you bring them there, if you bring them to the door and they decide not to walk through it, and you ask them, does it make sense to stop here or should we push through? Then I think you've done everything that you could have done.
How do you know? How do you know whether it's a design problem or it's an external problem caused by the group? I mean, for an engineer, it's very easy to know whether it's a problem with the engine or a problem of the environment. But as a facilitator,
I think you have to ask them, is it important that we continue? It seems like the conversation has shifted. It seems like this has become more important. Should we keep going here? Or should we stick to what we said we were going to come and talk about today? At the end of the day, it's their agenda. You've just designed it in a way that allows them to get through it. Because every time I design an agenda, it's based on what they said. It's very, it's like, it reminds me of going to the therapist. Here's what you said. Is this still important to you? Here are the things that you said were going to be important to you during our conversation. I heard you say this and this and this. Is this what you really think? Is this what you feel? So a lot of it is just mirroring back to them what you're observing and letting them decide where to go. And as long as you kind of hold the container in front of them, say, these are the constraints that we brought into this. These are the goals that we had. This is what we were trying to accomplish. Does it make sense to keep going here or change direction? I worked with a woman once who was so wired differently in terms of what facilitation meant to her. She was 100% driven by the optics of what was important to senior leaders in the company. And so when we talk about this topic of leading from the front versus from the back, she was always at the front with lots of power, lots of assertion, disc personality type, very pace setting, right? So there's all these like definitions around leadership where you can be very assertive and autocratic and directing where you want the conversation to go because you were hired to get to a specific outcome, and come hell or high water, you're going to get the group there, even if that means that you take over the conversation and say, this is where we need to go. Do you agree? That's one way, and some leaders want facilitators to come in and do that and just take charge. They want you to lead because they know that the group has a very passive nature for whatever reason, for probably a million different reasons. But then other times, and what's more in my nature is to paint the picture for them and then to step back. So a lot of that comes with teaching, coaching. It's much more democratic. It's much more affiliative, right? Like, here's what we said we wanted to get to. How do you want to get there?
And I wonder whether it's really sometimes good to have this leader facilitator who just pulls the group because the group is passive. And I think no group is passive by nature. It's like, what makes the group passive? Either they don't believe in the outcome. Maybe there's nothing in for them. Maybe they didn't choose to be there. Maybe they're afraid of something. And I think this would then be at the core, because I think if we understand what our role is and how we can contribute, and if we find meaning in that, I don't see any reason why a group would remain passive and would need a facilitator to pull them.
Yeah, right. And you named some really great examples, right? That's just what they've learned. They learned when they're active and choose things and share ideas, especially bold ideas, that their head gets chopped off. Mm-hmm. Or that their ideas just get taken and repackaged by somebody else in the company. But yeah, I think it's learned behavior. And I also 100% agree that any human being, any team, any person that's working on something wants to feel a sense of contribution to it. They want to feel a connection to it. And when they do, that's when you get their best ideas, of course. And that's also scary to some leaders, that the group could become self-sufficient. It's funny because I've worked with a lot of leaders that say, I want the group to be more self-sufficient and proactive and self-starters and all these things. And then I watch them, right? They hired me to do a sprint or something. And I say, well, before we do the sprint, we're going to do a half day sort of like team activities, set of activities, so I can see what the dynamics are like. And I write a page of notes down. I say, well, you cut a lot of people off and you laughed when the person suggested this idea, and you and the rest of your executive team reacted to 3 things with, that'll never work. I said, so these behaviors probably doesn't enlist the support and the excitement of the rest of the team.
Did he react? That's so bold.
The one most clear example I ever had of that was a leader in a company that wanted her designers to be all those things, more proactive, more self-starter, go get it, more aggressive. And in our sprint, the one that she wanted to really coach up the most and get the most out of the session, she started drawing something on the board, and the executive on the team took the marker out of her hand and said, not like that, like this. And I was like, could we step outside? I wanted to just share what I just saw with you. I'm like, you know how you wanted to get a lot out of this designer? I'm like, you just took the marker out of her hand. She's like, I did. She's like, shit, I didn't mean to do that. I'm like, well, this is the behavior that probably shuts her down. So, just observing stuff like that. That's what makes a great facilitator. Just the observation, holding people accountable. The executive wanted her team to do better, but she was shutting them down.
And she didn't do it on purpose, and she was totally blind about her own behavior.
Completely blind.
And this actually brings me back to something you said beforehand when you described how an extrovert versus an introvert would absorb information, and makes me wonder whether actually introverts who are better in observing, reflecting, mirroring are actually the better facilitators, because they would have the headspace to really see these details and sense it. Might also sense what's going on with this designer that you just mentioned, whereas an extrovert's so preoccupied with their appearance and their performance that they might miss it.
Yeah, so it sounds like the trick is to be an ambivert, is to know when to step forward and when to step back, when to observe, all with the freeing yourself from the expectation of being right, though.
Yeah.
Of knowing that this is the end point to the conversation, because it most likely will shift and the energy will change. Someone will be very excited about something you hadn't planned for, and another person will be very disappointed for something you had planned for. But knowing that it wasn't your agenda or your conversation to begin with.
And you cannot fix them anyway.
Yeah, right.
What is your favorite exercise?
Well, one other trait I have is focus. So as an entrepreneur, I tend to lack focus. So depending on the week, I probably have a new favorite activity that I'm doing. But I think the theme of what's fun or what I like most, I may be painting myself as a psychopath, but I've learned to be very uncomfortable over the last couple of years. So doing things that get me out of my comfort zone and see them work, and then you talked a little bit before about like having confidence in the activity or what you're doing. So for me, being able to watch someone do something that I would think I'd never have, there's a better word than balls, have the courage to do, and then watching it work and watching what it unlocks for me, and then being the person that gets to share that with a group of people that are at the starting point where they're like, this is nonsense. This is like some silly bullshit that we're doing in the room, we're wasting time, and then watch them come out the other side and be like, whoa. And so activities like that could be guided meditation in a workshop, which I still have to really calm myself down to do any sort of like mindfulness or any sort of guided session like that, because most of the time getting into it, I have 40 different excuses ready that I shouldn't be doing this. But the one exercise I've actually done that I really enjoy doing is, it used to be called Intentions, Concerns, Boundaries, and Dreams, and now it's called the All In by Alex Jameson and Bob Gower. They're a husband and wife couple. And, you know, it's a wonderful activity and I love doing it. But I think the more important thing, or the more important theme behind it, is allowing the group a moment to drop their walls and get vulnerable. And so you can do really intentional, really emotional exercises like the All In, where you share your intentions and your concerns and your boundaries and your dreams, which feels out of place when you're there for a business workshop or something very, you know, where at the end of this, we should be here on the chart. And so doing something like that is really emotional and really deep and really uncomfortable for me, but now so rewarding for the groups that I lead it through. You know, and then on the flip side of that is having fun and allowing people to drop their walls just by laughing together. So doing a round of embarrassing stories where everyone has a minute or two to just share something that is vulnerable. What's interesting to listen to there is the types of stories that people share. So you'll have some people that will tell a personal story because they're at work and they don't want to share anything embarrassing at work. And then other people that share only work stories because their personal life shouldn't come into the workplace. And when you listen for those, and then you say, if you shared a personal story, do one more round and share a business story. So people thought like, oh, this is tough to do. And then you really get them out of their comfort zone by talking about like the context that they weren't willing to go to in the first round. So it's just fun. And most of the time people are laughing and, you know, like really getting to know one another. So doing stuff like that is by far much more exciting for me than, you know, the 2x2 framework or, you know, the really tough business journey mapping activity.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you say, it's so rewarding once you do it. And I wonder what it is that it feels so scary to actually lead that, because from my experience, a group would never say, no, I don't do that. So usually they always follow whatever you ask them to do. And still sometimes I catch myself that I suddenly don't do things, although I planned them to do. And I wonder where this comes from, whether it's still this trying to look good, although as a facilitator, I should be past that, although I don't like the word should. How do you deal with it? How do you nudge yourself? Yeah,
I think you hit on it without saying the same words. I think it's your story. It's not, you look at someone's face and they were looking off to the side and you told yourself, oh, I knew I shouldn't have done this activity. They don't want to be here. I'm a failure. Right? And imposter syndrome overwhelms you in that moment. And like we said about the shy, you know, like what they're most likely thinking about is maybe has nothing to do with it. Or maybe they were thinking this seems like a waste of time. And they're entitled to think that. They've never done it. Maybe you thought it the same way when you first did an activity, or when someone came into a workshop that you were a part of 10 years ago and they said, we're going to do some improv together. And you thought, oh my God, I'm here to figure out the customer experience for this new service I'm launching. Why am I doing improv? So allowing, like you said, you can't fix people, but you can be confident that you know where you're trying to get them to at the end of the activity and get over the story that you made up in your mind that you're wasting people's time. Because of course you're not. You designed this for a very specific reason.
And it reminds me a little bit of this process where today I decide that tomorrow I want to eat healthy. So I make my meal plan that in the morning I eat only fruit and then a salad and whatsoever, my veggies. And then comes tomorrow and I have, there was this very stressful call in the morning and then I watched the news. I really deserve a pizza and then I can have this beer. And with these activities, it's similar. So I plan these activities. I know that it's good for the group to have these very kind of intimate, slightly embarrassing check-ins. I know it's good for the group to have a meditative, guided moment. And then comes the session and I find excuses why I just don't do it.
Yeah. The first time I had designed this half-day team building workshop to go in front of a sprint. I was hired to run a design sprint for a company in San Francisco. And the morning of that first kickoff workshop with the team, I had prepared the whole room. Right? This was a couple of years ago, so I was at their offices. I prepared the whole room. It looked beautiful. And I was like, I'm not going to do this team workshop. I'm like, who am I? I've never done anything like this. They hired me to do this specific thing. There's no way I'm doing it. And something held on to it in me. And I was like, just do it. And the one woman who I was most worried about, she's very tough, hard to read, always just looked like she was upset. She's like, Jay, she came up to me at lunch. Why did you do this workshop like this today? And I told her about like building trust and allowing us to settle into it. She's like, well, I read the sprint book and none of this was in here. Like, where did you get this from? And I kind of told her through my story of like working with teams and allowing them to feel safe. And that allowed for better ideas and more creativity and sort of this sense of team camaraderie. And she's like, I can't believe that a sprint can happen without this workshop happening before it. So I was like, whew, that's not where I thought you were going with this. I thought you were very upset. She's like, no. She's like, I can't imagine if you had just put us into the sprint and not done this workshop. She's like, this is so important. It was a must that we did this first. Whew. So it's a huge relief. So I was like, okay, if I got hurdle of it, then keep going. Keep going.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing this. I think it's very, encouraging. And I cannot believe that we already spoke for an hour.
Just like that.
Yeah. So if someone fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up and doesn't have time to listen to our conversation, what would you like them to take away?
Get more sleep. And then I think take the pressure off yourself to be an expert. That's not what facilitation and expertise are, probably closer to antonyms. You don't need to be the expert in the room for sure. And knowing that allows you to show up and remain curious with the people that you're in there to help and support and come with a mindset of being in service of them. And sometimes being in service of them will be being at the front of the room and being powerful and pushing them forward, sometimes pulling them forward. And then other times it will be stepping back and allowing them to continue the conversation and knowing when it makes sense for you to kind of bounce around the edges a little bit just to support them, so that they know you're there and supporting them, but that it's their conversation to be had.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.